Okay, well, welcome everyone to the KGI Summer Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us today. We're fortunate today to have Chang here. And Stephen is actually a graduate from our MBS program. And in addition to that, we have Dr. Kumar. So I'll let Dr. Kumar say a few words. And throughout this session, please feel free to put any questions in the chat, and we're happy to address those at the end of the presentation. So again, welcome, and I'll pass it over to Dr. Kumar.
All right. Thanks, Jason. Hello, everyone. Again, welcome to, I think, one of the initial sessions of the speaker series. We only had a couple of speakers so far. It's my pleasure to welcome Stephen Chang, who is one of our most senior alumni, right? If you want to say one of the initial classes at KGI. He has always come back to KGI and helped us out in terms of describing his journey, giving us a very clear and authentic picture of what it takes to go on into a career in this particular case, consulting. So I enjoy hearing Stephen's talk every year. I was the host last year too. It is really fun to hear just a very honest and direct sort of exploration and description of what a career in consulting would be like. So he's greatly accomplished in the field of consulting. So if you have any questions, please do let him know later. So without further delay, I would like to welcome Stephen to start with this talk.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. Pleasure to be able to connect with all of you today and just to be able to talk a little bit about a career as a consultant. And just a few logistics. First of all, I apologize for my cough. I caught COVID about 2 months ago, but this lingering cough just won't go away. And so still trying to recover from that. So every so often I'll go on mute and pause and cough my lungs out before continuing here. But very happy to be able to connect with all of you today. A second logistical thing, if you're able, please do turn on your cameras. Thank you, Robert. It's great to be able to see you in person. But for other folks, I just want to be able to sort of gauge how the talk is going. If I'm boring you to death, I'll just stop and maybe tell a joke or something. But it just really helps the responsiveness if you're able to turn on your cameras there. Today, with regards to the agenda, just a few simple topics. First, I'll do a quick presentation about myself and consulting and what Syneos does, but really spend the rest of the time talking about what a career in consulting looks like. And that way, hopefully intrigue and to pique your interest as a potential option in the future, if that is something of interest. And so really hoping for an ongoing dialogue and communication with regards to consulting, because I must admit, when I was an undergrad, I did not know what a consultant did. And I sometimes to this day, I still don't know. My parents will sometimes still ask me, so Stephen, what is it that you do? Even though now I've been a consultant for about 15 years, and they still sometimes have questions about that. And despite my best attempts of explaining it to them, they still don't get it. So definitely would be happy to answer any questions, because I remember I was just like you guys back in the day and really wished I had the chance to talk to somebody about consulting. So with that, a few quick things about myself. As Dr. Kumar mentioned, I did graduate from KGI back in 2008 with the MBS degree. I did graduate with a few awards from KGI. I really valued my time there because it did afford me the opportunity to go into consulting and sort of help me pivot my career from a really scientific and lab-based expertise in my undergrad. As you can see, I went to UCSD, doubled in bioengineering and biochemistry, worked in a lab for several years during the time, and realized I was really tired of pipetting, running labs, running what do we call them, columns and various gels, and then killing lots of mice, right? That was not for me. And KGI did allow me to jump into something more business related, and then from there into a field of consulting. Currently at Syneos Consulting, I'm a senior managing director. It's the equivalent of being a senior partner at a law firm or at a consulting firm. And so that's my current role. And I also head up consulting operations for the entire firm. So sort of a chief operating officer type of role within Syneos Consulting. And so that said, I'll just jump right into some of the work. So for maybe a raise of hands, how many of you as a child really wanted to be a consultant when you grew up? I see no hands, right? I can't say I honestly wanted to be a consultant. I sort of wanted to be an architect, or, oh, Abdul, you wanted to be a consultant. Good for you, that's awesome. Admittedly, you're a rare breed. Usually not a lot of folks have done that. And so it's a weird role, right? Because it's not something that's actively publicized. Even if you look at TV shows and movies, people don't really talk about consultants, right? You could be at a law firm, you could be at a business analyst, but nobody really talks about consulting. But consultants actually make up a really big chunk of the industry. And so when a company faces a question that they aren't able to answer, or they're too busy to be able to actually do the work themselves, they'll outsource to a consulting firm to be able to help out with those things. And so a consultant essentially, sorry, my build is a little off here. A consultant is basically a person who provides professional expert advice, right? Because the companies aren't able to answer those questions. And I would categorize consultants into two general buckets. You've got your generalists and then your specialists. A generalist will typically go into a big consulting firm like a McKinsey or a BCG, and then they will be staffed on various different types of projects. You might be staffed on a project working with the pharmaceutical, life sciences, biotech industry to start, but then the next project might be with aerospace, and then another project might be with retail and finance, right? So it could vary a lot on the types of industries that you work with. A specialist would then have specific expertise in a certain field, right? You might be a specialist consultant on only in life sciences, or only in a specific subset of law and audit, or taxation, right? So there's different types of consulting, and you'll just have different classifications. And then there are two different paths of being a consultant. Some folks that go into industry for 15, 20 years, they really build their expertise in a particular area. And then in time, afterwards, they're like, okay, I'm done with industry. And after 20 years, they say, I'm gonna retire and become my own independent consultant, right? So that industry veteran either joins a consulting firm, or they just do an independent mom and pop shop, and the network that they've built over the years would hire them over to become a consultant for them on that particular field. Or another path is being a career consultant. This is somebody who, after graduating from your undergrad or graduate program, enters as an analyst or a very junior person in the consulting firm, and through the years of consulting for many different types of projects, builds that experience and rapport to be able to then become a true expert in the field. Because as a consultant, you get exposure to different types of companies, different types of projects, and over time, you just really build your arsenal and ability to be a good consultant there. And so there's multiple paths to being a consultant. There's not one one-stop shop, but definitely whatever path you take for your career, consulting is always a potential option. I'll pause there to see if there are any questions. All right, so Stephen, what does a consultant do? I don't really know, right? You said this consultant thing, you said there's different types, but what does a consultant actually do on a day-to-day basis? And it depends on your role, and it depends on your level of experience. So if you're coming straight from undergrad or straight from graduate school, and you want to enter into consulting, more often than not, you'll be doing a lot of research and content development. And by content development, I basically mean building PowerPoint slides or building Excel spreadsheets of taking all of that information to be able to distill and tell a cohesive story of the answer at hand, right? If your client is asking you, I want to know what my strategy is for commercializing this new product, whatever that product is, right? It could be the next generation Apple iPhone. It can be a new drug that's about to be launched into for physicians to use to treat the latest form of cancer. Whatever that issue is, you'll do the research, you'll do the background analysis, you'll be able to look at what competitors are doing and distill all of that, excuse me, to prepare a story on PowerPoint slides that can be shared with your team or with executives, and that will lead to a final deliverable. And so I took a screenshot of my calendar here. Now this admittedly was now from about 2 years ago, but you can just see how busy a a consultant might be, right? Usually this is more at a leader level because I have multiple meetings throughout the day. But if you're just entering in as a consultant, you would have fewer meetings because more of your time will be spent doing the research, building the PowerPoint slides, reviewing the content with your managers, and maybe one meeting per day to review with the client or with other executives. Then by the time you're a manager, this is now maybe you're a consultant for 3 to 5 years. You now have built a good enough experience to be able to manage other consultants. And here you will begin to attend more meetings, review slides that your consultants are building, but making sure that the content are correct, your consultants have the guidance that they need, and also managing the client relationship. By the time you're a leader, so usually that's sort of a principal or a partner level at a firm, then you're more focused on selling projects. You're more focused on making sure the quality of the deliverable is there, that the team is inspired, that you do have a vision of what happens, and that you're able to deliver on that. Many people, they go into consulting for a couple years, and then once they're in consulting for a couple years, get the experience, they oftentimes jump to industry, right? That they are able to then go into a similar role within a pharmaceutical or biotech company, or into the home office of another big tech company, whatever type of consulting you do, and then really support the teams internally. But some people, after a couple of years, they love consulting and they realize that the growth is there, then they continue the path of consulting as well. And that's sort of the path that I've taken in my own career. So I'll pause there to see if there are any questions for what a day in the life in consulting looks like. And I'm also looking at the chat to see if there are any questions from folks here on the line.
Just to add, Stephen, that for the students, this is very, very, very valuable information for you guys, because this just shows you the day in the life, right? And for those people who are thinking about consulting. So please ask any questions if you have any.
And for those of you who joined late, I would love to be able to see your faces. So if you're able to turn on your cameras, I'll thank you in advance. So thank you for those who already turned on cameras. So Varun, asking about what internal administration is. Every company has internal stuff, right? Sometimes it's training, sometimes it's just an internal operational update. Sometimes a company wants to roll out the latest IT update to your computers, but you need to know what that new system looks like. Sometimes it's just a team building activity, right? So just things that an internal company will do in order to better engage the team or to roll out new tools, right? So that would be a small portion of your job that's not client or project related. Great question there, Varun.
I have a question, Stephen.
Absolutely.
So your schedule that you have there, your calendar,
Yes.
Is this all for one company, or are you consulting for multiple companies at once?
Yeah, it depends on your level, and it also depends on the consulting firm you're a part of. So at Syneos, where I'm a part of, usually a consultant is only assigned to one project at a time. So it would all be for just one company. But since this is taken from my calendar as a leader, I'm supporting maybe 10, 15 different projects all at the same time. So it would be for up to 8 to 10 different clients simultaneously, as well as internal meetings, operational meetings. Sometimes I'll have a KGI presentation, right? That will be showing up on my calendar as well. So it is a mix of everything else that's there.
Thank you.
Right, but to throw it out there, day in the life in consulting, it is not a 40-hour week. In fact, if you go into consulting expecting a 40-hour week, you will be sadly disappointed. Treat consulting like a law firm, right? If you look at all the TV shows about law firms where people are spending late nights in the office, well, I guess now working at home, but back in the day, right, people are in the office, it's really dim, and then they're still working. In some ways, that is consulting, right? You're working hard. For me, I have calls with Europe, India, Argentina, East Coast, West Coast, pretty much every single day. So I could be up as early as 5 a.m. for a call, and I could be up as late as 11 p.m. for another call. My worst was a 2 a.m. call, which just, the client wanted a 2 a.m. call with Europe. So I'm like, okay, let's do it. So there are times where you're not going to have a 9 to 5, basically, in consulting. However, in consulting, you are also compensated well, as if you were working at a law firm. Right. So just so you know, the average salary for somebody who graduated from KGI's MBS program, coming into Syneos anyways, was well over 6 figures. Right. So it was probably gosh, depends on the level of experience and the amount you have, but it's, you would be coming in at least 100, right? If you came straight from undergrad, went to KGI's MBS program, you'll come in at that point in time, right? So if that seems attractive to you, great, but also know you're working a lot. So the compensation is there, right? If you come into KGI's MBS program with, let's say, 2 to 3 years of relevant work experience, and you come in as a consultant, your salary could start easily at 130, 140. And so that's also another comparison, plus bonuses that are pretty substantial as well. And so this is just probably average in terms of what the industry might be. If you join like a large consulting firm like a BCG and a McKinsey, which and then you had an MBA, you'd be entering at about 150, 160, if not more now in light of changing economic dynamics. So that said, it's variable, but just know that it is quite a lucrative start. And I know for many of you coming, especially in undergrad, these numbers are quite big, right? If you wanted to go into consulting, but just know it is competitive getting into consulting, as well as being able to do well in consulting. It is a lot of hard work, but you're also well compensated for it. Question?
I did have a question. So you said most people stick out in consulting for 2 to 3 years and then move on to industry. What part of consulting made you stay?
Well, thanks for asking. I think for me, I had a faster acceleration in my career at Syneos, and that's allowed me to continue to learn skills that I would not have had I joined industry, right? So at that 3-year itch mark where I'm like, okay, what else is out there beyond consulting? I was promoted to a manager level. And who at the age of like 25, or not, like 24, at the age of 27, would be able to start managing people having only worked for like 3 to 4 years, right? Not that many, but consulting allows you to accelerate your career a lot faster. Then by year 6, when I started having the itch again, I had the opportunity to get promoted to a leadership level where I started selling and started delivering on projects. So that again challenged my growth to be able to do new things that I historically would not have had done. And so that was very lucrative and helpful as well. In terms of the people that I'm working with, again, really, really smart, top-notch people, right? We hire folks from the top-tier MBA programs around the world, as well as have folks from Ivy League schools and KGI, which students from KGI have actually done really, really well, especially from the MBS program at consulting and at our firm, just because there's a lot of synergistic approaches to our projects. And so all said, definitely a lot of good growth and opportunities working with smart people, working with the best clients. I mean, I worked on projects and products that have helped to save thousands of lives, right? Or help launch new drugs that have extended overall survival for patients with cancer. So all of those things are very meaningful in what I do as well. So beyond my own growth, but the types of projects, and I sort of have like ADD sometimes where I feel like I have to do a lot of things at once. And so consulting's allowed me to do so versus going into industry, you're pigeonholed into one silo and you're stuck there now for 2 to 3 years and your acceleration and growth sort of slows down a little bit too.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kusha. Great question. All right. So before I jump into a little bit about Syneos, any other general questions about consulting? My recruiting team probably insisted that I talk a little bit about our company just to make sure that hopefully after you finish your studies and academic careers in a couple of years, that perhaps if you would like to join Syneos, that would be an opportunity as well. All right. Okay, well, if you think about additional questions, please feel free to ask. But in the meantime, I'll talk a little bit about Syneos and what sets us apart from our other competing consulting firms, because I know there are hundreds, literally hundreds of consulting firms focused on the life sciences industry around the world. And so each one probably has a little bit of a different take on things, but the general philosophy is the same, right? Work hard, play hard, get things done, do it well, make sure clients love you. And then that's sort of how we all operate. So I'll talk a little about Syneos, the company as a whole, our people, and then the career progression within a consultant, or within consulting at Syneos. All right. So at Syneos Health, the consulting division is, as you can see in this dark blue chevron here, is only one portion of a much larger organization. At Syneos Health, we have over 28,000 employees now globally. covering everything from traditional clinical research to communications to advertising agencies to contract sales teams. So a lot of the different groups that would typically make up a traditional biotech company, we are an outsourced partner for all those things for pharmaceutical life sciences companies. So if you imagine, for example, with the, everybody knows about COVID, everybody knows about the vaccines that had to be rolled out very quickly. And so at Syneos, for example, we were one of the CROs, which stands for clinical research organizations, that actually did the clinical trial for the COVID vaccine, for one of the COVID vaccines, I can't really say which ones, but we did the clinical trial, we executed on it, we delivered on it, found the results, synthesized it, and then also to help to commercialize portions of that aspect, right, of that vaccine. So a lot of this was outsourced to a company like Syneos to be able to support those things, right? And likewise, for me, I've worked on a number of projects that support new products that are, excuse me, that are being commercialized as well. So what's the strategy to reach physicians? What's the strategy so that patients will be able to use this drug? And how do we get it paid for and reimbursed by insurance companies, right? So all of the things that go into commercializing a drug, we would do that as well from a consulting perspective. And so, like I said, consulting is but one small portion of a large group within the broader Syneos organization. And as a whole, we are a product development company, so to speak. We have all of the skill sets and all the capabilities that a traditional biotech or pharma company will have, but not our own drug. So you can outsource all of that to a specific company like Syneos, right? So we, as an organization, want to shorten the distance from lab to life. That is our vision. We want to make sure that patients are able to get the latest treatments so that whatever disease they have will be quickly addressed in terms of their survival or their cures. We have values. Like every other company, we have values. I won't talk about that too much, but really it's to inspire us to really do what's best for patients. Within our consulting organization as a whole, we do have a number of name changes over the years. So when I was at KGI, gosh, good 15, 17 years ago now, we were Campbell Alliance, but through the years, we had a number of renamings, mergers, acquisitions, and now we're known as Syneos Consulting. But just so you know, in terms of history, Campbell Alliance was the first firm to start recruiting at KGI back in 2000 and I want to say 2004, was the first KGI alum that actually joined what is now Syneos Consulting. And for a number of years, Campbell Alliance, or now Syneos, was the only firm that actually recruited at KGI for consulting. And so we've got a great partnership over the last 2 decades and very happy to continue this partnership with KGI and Syneos. Right. In terms of Syneos, a lot of work that we do. Because we are so large, we are the over 90% of all the drugs that are commercialized have been supported by Syneos in one way, shape, or form or another. We do a lot of stuff. We still do a lot of stuff. We still do a lot of stuff. So what are the things that we do, right? Basically, it covers all types of therapeutic areas. So if we need to do something for oncology or cardiology or immunology, right? Any disease area, that's where our consulting team really focuses in on and has deep expertise on. And then we are able to help with all the aspects that a traditional pharma biotech company will need advice on. So whether it's from research and development, to running the clinical study, to building the market access strategy, to what's the medical affairs organizational rollout, to what is our strategy in targeting physicians, what do physicians think about our drug, what do patients need, we can do it all from a consulting and advice perspective. And so they'll ask a question like, I want to know how physicians will respond to our new drug, assuming we get FDA approval. Well, we can run the market research with physicians, interview them, understand what their take is. We can then build the strategy in terms of what the company should do to reach those physicians. We can run a forecast model to see what the peak revenues are for that said asset. And then we can come back to the client and say, here's the opportunity. This is what the physicians are saying. Here's how much revenue your drug might be able to bring in. And this is what you should share to the board in order to get their blessing to source and to fund all of the requirements for you to commercialize, right? So from our consulting division, we can help answer all of those questions. We can even say, here's what the competitive landscape looks like in 3 to 5 years. And because of that competition, this is what you should do now in order to stand up and to be successful amongst your competition in the future. All right, so basically consulting, we can do it all. I'll pause there, see if there are any questions.
Stephen, I had a quick question, and forgive my, I thought you had a structure like a, a combined schematic of what Syneos does with the blue, circle of just consulting. So my question is, if your firm gets, let's say clinical, let's say you're functioning as a CRO and you're testing, going through the clinical trials and everything, does that also mean that you would have the business side of things for the same drug or same vaccine, or you separate your divisions and there's a sort of an independent view of the drug and the business?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dr. Kumar. At Syneos, there are 2 different models by which we would typically target a particular client. So for a large biotech company that already has a lot of infrastructure in place, we would probably do what I'll call an a la carte approach, right? Sort of like a menu, you just sort of pick the items that you want. Because the large biotech or pharma company already has all the infrastructure in place, they might be able to already do a lot of their commercial work themselves, and they may not need the commercial work bundled with the clinical work. Plus, at a large company, they have lots of silos. So the buyer for the clinical research work will not be the same buyer for the contract field team, won't be the same buyer for the marketing advertising agency, right? So as a result, we would just have different groups target each of the different stakeholders because they're already siloed in those big biotech companies. But what sets Syneos apart is that for a number of small to mid-sized companies that may not have that infrastructure, we can be a one-stop shop, very turnkey organization, such that if they wanted to just outsource everything for a specific molecule to Syneos, we can do that. We can run the clinical trial. We can demonstrate the value of the trial, find the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 outcomes. Then from there, we can help commercialize that as well, right? We can understand what the medical affairs needs are. We can then build the access strategies, and we could build the segmentation for the physicians. And then we can even roll it out and deploy it from a contract field organization support. And that's actually what sets Syneos apart from our competitors. We're not just a consulting organization. We are a consulting organization within a larger organization, so we can do a little bit of everything depending on what the client needs are. So that said, usually for our smaller companies, they want to outsource everything to Syneos. We can do that, and then we're able to then bring in the appropriate consulting across the board. And then we also have data and insights from all the work that makes our projects from consulting more impactful, right? We have thousands of clinical trials with patient data that we can blind and mine to be able to apply to see what does that look like from a commercial perspective. We also have 5,000 reps that are part of Syneos Health's contract sales organization, and they also collect data in terms of HCP preferences and segmentations and things that we can then blind and properly mine to be able to see what the outcomes ought to be as well in terms of a proper field deployment strategy. And so all of those things feed very nicely to the projects that we do in consulting.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Any other questions about just consulting, the types of projects that we do? All right. So basically, I'll skip some of the projects because I sort of voiced them over, but talk a little bit of why Syneos in terms of some of the aspects of joining this firm, right? So we've had a number of great experiences from people who've joined us. So it is a good balance of professionalism and fun. It's, like I said, a work hard, play hard culture, but a true meritocracy. It is not unheard of for somebody to get promoted once a year. I am living proof that somebody could get promoted once a year. And then I pretty much continued on that trajectory until I hit the partner level, and then sort of stayed at the partner level for about 7 or 8 years, but then more recently got promoted now to that chief operating officer type of role, right? So definitely there are different roles and responsibility that you can potentially have in consulting, but definitely at Syneos, if you're good at what you do, you will get recognized for that, and you will have a fast career and trajectory as well. Now, admittedly, that doesn't happen for everybody, right? If you need a couple years to get very good at your role, That's fine too, because you'll still get promoted once you've demonstrated the skill sets needed to be successful at the next level. Okay. So why Syneos in particular? The work, like I said, it's inspiring work. I worked on a product that that extended survival for breast cancer patients for more than a year. And that when the data were released at a big conference, there was like dead silence in the room, right? There's thousands of physicians and oncologists sitting in the room, and it was just like quiet when they saw the data. Then there was a standing ovation at the close of the presentation, because those physicians realized that this drug would revolutionize how they treated these breast cancer patients. And it's phenomenal, right? To be able to say, I worked on a drug that will extend breast cancer patient lives by a year, right? When they had a terminal diagnosis, a year is so much more for the patient's well-being and quality of life. And how can you even quantify a price for that? And so things like that, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, it's special. It's inspiring, and the work is great. We're working with the best companies around the world to be able to bring life-saving drugs to patients. And that's one thing that we really, that inspires me. Sorry, Kusha, a question from you?
Yes, I did. So you said, well, I had a question on being promoted. What did you do to set yourself apart to be promoted as frequently as you did?
Yeah, I think in terms of the culture, when I talk a little bit about the fact that, maybe I'll talk about it under the rewards bucket at the very end here, maybe I'll jump to that first, right? It's advancement based on merit. So in consulting, when you're interviewing for a consulting firm, it's not your traditional interview where there's like, oh, tell me about a strength and a weakness of yourself, right? Or tell me about something special about you. We'll have those questions, but part of the consulting interview process also involves case studies. And these case studies test your ability to think logically and to think in frameworks and to be able to present yourself articulately and in a way that's convincing and very logical. And so if you're able to do that well as a consultant, that will help you get promoted quickly, right? Somebody who's strategic, somebody who's thoughtful, and you work hard because, like I said, more than 40-hour weeks, right? And you're able to take all this data, tell it in a cohesive manner, and be able to logically lay it out so that clients are like, oh yeah, that story makes sense, right? This is why I would do your recommended strategy. And so the ability to take this, a bunch of raw information, and then summarize it and to be able to tell that story in a logical manner, that's one aspect of it, especially as a consultant. From there, as a manager, are you good at coaching? Are you a people person, right? Because half of the battle in consulting is actually just selling yourself. If I came in here and I'm like, consulting's awesome, you guys really should join consulting, it's wonderful. You'll probably be like, no, Stephen, consulting sounds horrible. I would never do consulting, right? And if you can't sell yourself, you're not going to be successful as a coach, as a mentor, as a person to sell projects to clients. And so if you don't have that passion and that personal boldness that I'm hoping that you sense a little bit from me, then you may not be a good consultant either, because, or at least up to the manager and the leadership levels, because you also need to be able to be a good coach. You need to inspire. You need to convince people that you know what you're talking about, because one, you actually know what you're talking about, but two, you're able to present it in a compelling manner. So those are the things that we'll look for in the interviews, but then those are the things that will also get you promoted quickly. Okay. Like I said, the people that we work with are fantastic, absolutely fantastic people. Most people at Syneos have a graduate degree, if not more, and multiple. I have one colleague, and he's fantastic. He's got an undergrad from Harvard, a PhD from Yale, a law degree from Harvard also, and now he's joining us in consulting, right? I'm like, you were in school way too long, bud. But phenomenal person, right? And absolutely great in what he does. And so, again, very smart, intellectually curious individuals who I love and think as, you know, very fortunate to be able to work with and call my colleagues and friends. So the people are fantastic. Like I said, the environment is great as well, right? The leadership takes an active role in coaching and training and developing our team members, as well as the compensation and benefits. I already alluded to the salary ranges, but beyond that, the meritocracy, right? You get as high as it is that you're able to perform. And if you're not performing at a level, we'll coach and train you so we get you to that next level. So that's definitely an aspect of it. And our clients like us. They continue to hire us and renew the projects that we currently have ongoing. So this is the projections of the different roles, at least within Syneos. And every firm will have a different title, a different progression of roles. But usually, if you came straight from undergrad at Syneos, you'll come in as an analyst. If you have a master's degree, so like an MBS or a standard master's at Syneos, you might come in as an associate consultant. If you have 3 to 5 years of work experience and you got an MBA from a top tier business program, you might come in as a consultant, right? And that's sort of the level for the entry level folks. And then collectively in the consulting ranges, you might spend 3 to 4 years here on the first box of the blue lines here. Then after that, people usually then get promoted up to the management ranks. So the EM is the engagement manager and SEM is senior engagement manager. That's where you are managing team members, you're coaching them, you're training them, you're teaching them what to do. You're beginning to sell projects, you're beginning to deliver on projects, directly working closely with the client and driving things forward. And so here you're really focusing on making sure your team is happy, your team is being coached, the client likes you, and that you also have a very good rapport in project delivery. Then on the leadership level, this is where things are called different things at different companies. Here we call them directors at Syneos. It could be called a principal at another role or something else. But that's usually where you are now selling direct projects, you're leading projects, right? That every director might have 2 to 3 managers under them, and every manager might have 2 to 3 consultants under them, right? So you're now leading multiple projects and multiple engagements. And so it's basically a giant pyramid scheme in consulting, right? But that's the idea. As you get to the more leadership ranks, you are now generating revenue. And then by the time you get to a managing director, at other firms that's known as a partner, right, as well. So a managing director is really now taking ownership in selling, delivering, and generating more revenue for the firms and really helping setting the vision and the goal for the entire company moving forward. Okay. So like I said, maybe 3 to 4 years in the consulting ranks, maybe 3 to 5 years in the manager ranks. And then here in the leadership ranks, it's basically that's for many, that's sort of where you cap off, right? A partner at a firm is pretty much as high as you can go. And so that's sort of where the managing director ranks usually net off. Now, we do have some folks who grow up through the ranks, right? I'm an example of this, where I came in as an associate consultant and worked my way up, made it up to the managing director role, and now more of an operational role for the firm. Other folks, if they've been in industry 15, 20 years, they might join us as a director or managing director role as well, if they're able to generate that revenue. But you can tell that if you did 20 years in industry, then jumped over, that maybe it would only taken you 10 years to go up through consulting to get to the same level. Right, so consulting does help you accelerate your career more often than not. But then likewise, you could use the consulting career as a platform to jump into industry and work in the same way for a biotech or pharmaceutical company. But then admittedly, there your progression also then slows down a little bit as well. Questions?
So if students have questions, I don't want to, I do have a question, but I can wait for if anyone else has a. Okay, so I'll ask the question that many of them are thinking about, Stephen. I know that. No, I'm just, so when you go from, I can see, sort of increase in leadership roles almost as you go from left to right on this chart, right? So what are some of the common challenges that you see in or new employees, right? As they come in, they're, the first box, they're really into the technical stuff. They're immersed in their task roles, but then all of a sudden project management, now you also have to deal with people more often than others. And then obviously in the third column, it's a lot of leadership, right? So what are some of the challenges that you, in your experience all through these years, what are some of the challenges they face?
Absolutely. And so coming in on the consulting ranks, the first thing that really shocks people oftentimes is just the volume of work and the effort that's required. Because, in school, for those of you who know about the TMP projects at KGI, it's about almost a year, probably about 8 months of a project that is supporting a biotech company with a big question that they might have. Well, in consulting, we'll do that 8-month project in about 1 to 2 months, right? And so you've compressed something that's so big into a short period of time. Instead of having a full team, it's one person, right? So, but then you're also a full-time employee, so it's slightly different too. But it just imagine the volume of work that's there. It's the volume of work. It's trying to adjust from academia, switching over to industry, and just having a professional job. That sometimes is really hard. And then from there, the motivation, right? I have people who come up to me and they say, hey, Stephen, I have a question. What does, and I'm going to be a little joking here, what does the FDA stand for? And I'm like, okay, there's a thing called Google. Please Google it first, then come and ask me the question, right? And it's not FDA, right? It might be another acronym. I'm like, seriously, just Google the 4 letters of the acronym. Chances are it's going to be the first thing that pops up, right? And some people don't have that motivation, or just the, what's the word? Just that self-initiative to try to figure things out, right? If you don't have that inquisitive nature to try to be a problem solver, you're not going to do too well in consulting. So usually when you first start, that is an initial hurdle. But after 2 to 3 years, 4 years, you get the hang of it, right? And things are going well. And you make it up to a senior consultant here. A senior consultant does not necessarily mean that you'll be a good manager. Some people get cut off at that senior consultant rank because they're great at delivering on the project. They're great at executing very well on the project, but oh my gosh, they are the most difficult person to work with. They are a jerk and people don't want to work with them. If that's you, you will never get promoted to being a manager because I am never going to put a consultant under you because you're going to make that consultant's life miserable, right? So if you're a jerk of a person, you might make it up to senior consultant, but you will never, ever manage other people because, a good senior consultant doesn't mean you're a good manager, a people manager. And similarly, you might be the best manager in the world, but if you can't inspire people as a director, or if you can't sell projects, then you might stay at that manager ranks, right? Because once you get to the leadership levels, the director or managing directors, you need to bring in revenue, right? The firm needs to continue to grow. You need to sell projects. And so if you're not a good salesperson, that might limit you to getting up to that next level as well. So every big chunk will have a different skill set that you need to build over time. And for most people, if we realize, okay, they're a great senior consultant, but man, they're tough to work with, we'll give you the coaching to try to become a better person, I guess to say the least, to be a better person, and so that we can get you to that manager ranks, so that people will enjoy working with you and try to tone down the annoyingness, I guess is probably a more not as nice way of saying things.
Thank you, Stephen, for mentioning that, because there's sometimes a stereotype that you have to be tough, and sometimes it's almost like an act sometimes, right? Like just that, you have to be tough. So thanks for clarifying those personality traits. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Lily, yes. Oh, Lily, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I was wondering, how do you measure and evaluate success in each role, specifically in the entry levels of analyst and associate consultant?
Yeah, so at Syneos, I sort of do the following. Analyst and associate consultant are about the same. The main thing is that you have a level of a sense of more professionalism on the associate consultant level, right? Analyst, you're coming straight from undergrad, you've never worked a day in your life, and you're excited, but you don't know much. And so we need to give a lot of coaching and hand-holding. Same with associate consultant, but because you have a graduate degree, there's a little bit more of a professionalism that comes through. And so, but AC and analyst, I would treat about the same. And how we're evaluating them really is, can you follow instructions? Can you show that you're demonstrating initiatives? And if I draw something out for you, can you build that slide and know to say, okay, I'm gonna do the research to populate the tables and effectively pull through that data. A consultant is now able to do things a little bit more independently, right? That you can come and say, let me draw a framework. I've got some experience now. Like for somebody who has an MBA and 3 to 5 years of work experience, they'll be able to say, oh, I know I learned this framework from my business program, Porter's 5 Forces or a SWOT or whatever it is, right? And you can throw it in and you can start talking about your ideas in a logical manner. And you can go to your manager and say, here's an idea, what do you think? And then you're able to come to a good answer and good conclusion. And it's a little bit less tedious because there's also a sense of professionalism, right? Your emails don't need to be reviewed. You come across as credible versus an analyst or an associate consultant. You're very green and your emails are not going to sound professional. And we need to coach and to train you for that. By the time you're a senior consultant, how we're evaluating you is basically, can the project survive without managerial oversight? Like I said, the manager's job is to make sure the project goes well. But if you have a strong senior consultant, I jokingly say, if your manager got hit by a bus and is unable to work for the next month, will that project go haywire? a strong senior consultant will make sure that project continues to be successful, right? And so in that sense, a senior consultant, we don't need the manager, project will go fine. However, like I said, the difference between senior consultant and engagement manager is, as an engagement manager, can you teach somebody to do that project well, such that an analyst or an associate consultant can get the coaching that they need to be effectively delivering on that. Like I said, a strong senior consultant, project's going fine. You may not get promoted to engagement manager because you can't teach, you can't train, you can't inspire or motivate. And that's the main difference between a senior consultant and engagement manager. Does that make sense, Lily?
That does, thank you. My follow-up question is, what's the baseline that an analyst and an associate consultant should know, like going into their role? I know you said they're on the lower level, but what should they have already coming in?
Admittedly, every project that you're on is completely different. So now I'm talking to a lot of students here. I'm going to put on my alumni hat and take off my business person hat. And this is now coming as a KGI alum talking to KGI students. Basically, what you're learning at school, 95% of it is useless for a job in consulting, right? Because there might be one project or there might be one course that is directly relevant to what you're doing, but you're taking like 100 different courses throughout your entire academic career from undergrad all the way through grad school, right? So just that 1 to 5 classes that might be directly relevant to the project at hand. And I mean, but you're building the core skills of being thoughtful, being team players, or learning how to research, right? From all of your other classes. So all of those things will be critical in consulting, right? We want you to be able to be a problem solver. We want you to figure things out and to be able to know where to research. That will be all fine. But admittedly, I mean, I remember taking some medical device, what was it? I guess it was a med device class at KGI back in the day. I don't do much with med devices. And so the 3 classes I had to take with the professor back then, totally useless. But I did learn how to solve problems, how to do research on a topic that I needed to do. And those are directly relevant, right? So the core skill sets, can you solve a problem? Can you think logically? Can you approach a problem in a professional manner such that people will want to work with you? And those are the things I would look for from your academic programs. But right now, as an undergrad or graduate student, learn as much as you can, right? Because you don't know which class is going to be impactful until you actually get to that point. So admittedly, like I haven't used calculus in like my entire career as a consultant. I haven't had to use my linear algebra classes anymore, right? I haven't had to do too much coding and programming, even though I'd learned all of that when I was an undergrad at UCSD. But at the end of the day, there will be things that are applicable, to the work that you're doing. Wow, I haven't mentioned linear algebra in so long. This is weird, but but yeah. All right, any other questions? Great questions there, Lily.
Thank you. Did you say you were from UCSD?
I did, yeah. So
I'm a fellow Trident too.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank
Very
you.
good. All right. So final thoughts about Syneos Consulting anyways. We have offices all around the world. I realize that this slide is out of date. We now also have offices in Latin America, so in Buenos Aires as well. So definitely a global organization with a growing presence, over 350, now closer to 400 consultants around the world, just for our consulting division out of the 28,000 Syneos-wide employees. All right. So if you have questions about Syneos in general or consulting, in the future, if you would like to apply, I think right now you guys are all undergrads, so it might be a little bit early, but at least hopefully you get a feeling of what consulting looks like, right? That it's a dynamic field. It's exciting. You get to work on cutting edge projects and you get a broad exposure to different types of companies all throughout your career, right? If you joined at an industry side in one company, you get exposed to one product, one company for the 2 to 3 years that you're there, perhaps. And then you change roles and go to a different team, perhaps. In consulting, a project's going to last maybe 2 months. So after 2 to 3 months, you'll jump to a different project. It might be a different disease area, different type of project, different client, different company, and different set of skills that are needed. And you'll be able to jump around, learn a lot. And that's why a lot of times people join consulting straight out of undergrad as well, at least for Syneos. But then, like I said, you can do a great career in industry, become an executive in industry, then do your own consulting gig, 20 years down the line. And that could be a very viable option for you as well. So definitely lots of paths to go into consulting, but definitely an exciting field that oftentimes isn't talked about, especially when we're growing up, right? Nobody, like I said, minus, I think I forgot who it was it Varun or somebody who said, oh, they want to be a consultant growing up, but definitely not the case for the majority of us. So I'll pause, and actually that's the end of my presentation, and answer questions for the last 8 to 10 minutes here that we might have together. All quiet on the Western Front. Oh yeah, Lily, go ahead.
You were saying earlier how like in school, like we have that 8 months time period to work on a project, but in reality at work, you only have that 1 to 2 months. How do you have any advice of how to like condense all of that work into such a short amount of time, or like
Well, when you're doing your TMP project at KGI, the TMP is only one portion of your entire course load, right? You also have other classes you're taking, you're taking classes, you're working on homework assignments. So the TMP only ends up being, I don't know, 15, 20% of your overall workload during that year. So admittedly, the volume of work stays the same. It's just now you compress it and you have to focus on it entirely, because as a working adult, that becomes your job, right? So you really have no other responsibilities, I mean, beyond your personal responsibilities. But for work-wise, that's your primary focus. So you are able to do it. It's just a lot more work, right? Condensed into a shorter period of time. But the skill sets and the process of doing things are still the same, but it's just then accelerating it and bringing the solution in faster.
that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ami? Or Amy, sorry.
Yeah, I had a question about like, how do you work with teams as a consultant, and also how do you like interact with your clients? Like, how does that go, and like in a professional environment, especially?
Yeah, so it depends on the project at hand, right? So typically at Syneos, one project has 1 to 2 consultants on it. You also have a manager, and then you'll have the project leader. So at the very least, you'll always have 3 to 4 individuals that you're working with on that particular project. So in that sense, it's a very team-based environment where as a consultant, you'll ask your manager for input and advice, and he or she might delegate responsibilities to you and maybe the other consultant working on that project. And then you guys work collaboratively, like, oh, how do I do this? How do I do that? And then you can exchange information and provide updates there. Some projects get very big. I have one project right now, one project right now that has like 8 people. And then last year I did a project that had 15 people on it, right? So it could be a very big group. There's just a lot more coordination on the various segments of the project that you're working on. And so in that sense, yes, teamwork, absolutely critical. And you're spending a lot of time with these folks, right? Sometimes if you have to fly to the client site for a meeting, you'll spend time at the airport. And so I often call it the airport test during interviews. Like if I'm talking to you and you're boring me to death, I'm like, oh man, I don't think I'm gonna want to spend time at the airport with you, because you're gonna bore me to death. But if you're boring me, an internal coworker, then are you gonna bore the client to death also with your interactions? Because again, in consulting, you also want to come across as credible and engaging, right? And so things like that, that's the professionalism, right? Sometimes the emails that we send, you'll learn some professionalism skills coming from KGI's MBS program, but other times you may not, right? In terms of how do I write an email that says, hi, this is the value that I'm offering you, rather than what can you give me, right? So there's always a sense of professionalism and language that we want to include in our emails and how we express ourselves in presentations and so forth. So all of those things you'll build through time, and that's the sense of professionalism that we'll be looking for on projects as well as during the interview process.
Stephen, just wanted to quickly say thanks for highlighting that the email professionalism and some of those things that sometimes people take it for granted, right? They're sending the emails. So Abdul Aziz had a question about preparing for consulting role from school. So it says, how do one begin to prepare to assume a consulting role from school, particularly for someone with a bioscience related degree?
Yeah, so I mean, a graduate program like KGI's MBS program would be awesome, right? Because you do build a little bit more of the business skills that you would need to be able to do that effectively. And so this is my shameless plug for the MBS program. If you haven't decided to enroll, please do enroll. It's a fantastic program. And Dr. Kumar did not pay me to say that. But with regards to the bioscience degree, you know, some people do jump directly in from the bioscience degree into a consulting career, right? If you're able to think logically, sometimes you have an undergraduate consulting club or some other things where you're able to build the skills to do a case study, things like that. That's absolutely fine. Other folks, they join consulting for 2 to 3 years and realize they need to get an MBA, so then they go get the MBA afterwards and then go back into consulting. So there's multiple paths for that. But really, if you have the skill sets of thinking clearly, thinking in frameworks, being able to answer questions in an articulate manner, in a framework approach, right? All of those things will help you go far in consulting. And I think that in itself is what we'll be looking for there. Any other questions?
So I think last call, we have like 2 minutes, I think, or
Yes, Amy, go ahead.
This is just a simple question. Like, what's the most challenging thing that you encountered when you first started your career as a consultant?
The first it was building PowerPoint slides. Oh my gosh, the PowerPoint. There's a lot. I mean, you think you know how to build PowerPoint slides now, but then when you realize the depth and the details that we're looking for to make sure everything is right and correct and formatted properly, shared in a creative manner, and the amount of time it takes to build those PowerPoint slides. Now I build them very quickly, but when I first started, oh my gosh, it was painful. I think I had like carpal tunnel, or it felt like carpal tunnel, just from all the amount of typing and mouse clicking that I had to do. It gets better over time, honestly. So I think that was the initial shock of just PowerPoint and death by PowerPoint and the amount of research that was needed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. And really quick on the sense of professionalism, and this is just a small little pet peeve that I have from sometimes working with KGI students who've done it, who reached out to me in the past, right? I welcome all of you to add me on LinkedIn, so please do. If you search me out, Stephen Chang with Syneos, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Would love to add you to my network. But sometimes I've had KGI students basically email me quite directly, like, "Hi, I'm a KGI alum. Can I get a job?" I'm like, no, right? Because that in itself shows a sense of immaturity. It shows a sense of non-professionalism because I don't just hand out jobs to KGI alums freely. It requires a sense of tact and approachability, right? I don't even know you. So at least, you know, having the wherewithal and the maturity to understand, okay, I could reach out to alum, I could reach out to people in the network to understand and learn. I'd be happy to coach, happy to provide advice, right? But then a direct ask for a job with no background whatsoever typically won't go so well for you, right? So I encourage you to also have a little bit of professionalism when searching things out. And our alums at KGI, they're fantastic, right? If you reach out to them, more than happy to provide advice and career growth advice in general. But again, it requires a sense of tact as well as maturity in how you outreach them. That's like, I'm a student at KGI. I saw you're an alum at this type of field. Would love to learn more of what you did to get into that field so that I might be able to explore that too. Sounds so much better than Stephen, give me a job.
So that is, guys, that's this advice is very, I'm telling you, this is very valuable. And also like scheduling, you know, make sure you're respectful. Or I know Stephen covers this in talks typically, but yeah, so this is great advice. So I think it's we should be respectful of your time, Stephen, too. It's a 101. Really appreciate you spending time with us, and you know, just what a way to end the talk, right? So everyone remember that. That's sort of the take-home point for everyone. Really appreciate your time, Stephen, and thanks for sharing everything, you know, a lot of information about consulting with us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. Kumar, and thank you, Jason, for having me here. Like I said, it's a pleasure to be able to talk to all of you today. From a KGI alum perspective, I love the school, love being able to interact with all of you. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. Yeah, just find me on LinkedIn, and I think Dr. Kumar has my email, so yeah, he can share that as well if you'd like to, for folks who want to know more. So thank you for your time, and best of luck to you all with your academic endeavors. And then hopefully we get a chance to connect in the future.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.